Welcome back to Thinking Theologically podcast. Question for you. Have you ever wondered the songs that you were listening to? What were the messages were they saying? Or what were the values underlying it? Well, today we have Dr. Indra Selvarajah to bring us through and unpeel the layers of how we are listening to our music and why it matters as a Christian. Hi, welcome Dr. Indra. It's such a pleasure to have you here today for our episode on Thinking Theologically podcast. And today you're going to be speaking on this idea of music, which is a very pertinent concept or a lifestyle among the youngsters or whoever is listening to this podcast. I hope you're listening. But before we get into the meat of things, perhaps for the sake of the listeners, perhaps introduce who you are, what you do, where your burden lies. Yeah.
So thank you so much for your kind invitation. So my name is Indra Selvarajah, and I'm a medical music therapist who is lecturing at the Department of Music, University Putra Malaysia. And so what I do is, apart from teaching students and conducting training in music therapy, I also serve on the World Federation of Music Therapy Council. And so I really thank the Lord for opening up a host of opportunities and platforms for me to be able to serve through something that I'm so passionate about, which is music.
And okay, so whenever someone uses the word music, the first thing that probably comes to their mind is entertainment, right? But you use the word with therapy. Could you just give us a brief difference and its significance or implications of the difference between entertainment and therapy in your context, in your case?
Sure, that's a great question. So a lot of people respond to music as entertainment because that is what basically surrounds us. And so much of what we encounter through media, through movies, the lifestyle, opportunities that we have for rest and relaxation, recreation, it's coming in through all these media outlets. And so entertainment, actually, if you look at its function, it serves a trivial purpose in terms of providing us with the kind of amusement, very light kind of engagement that is actually meant to serve a certain level of respite and perhaps give us a chance to have a little bit of release and relaxation. But very seldom is entertainment something that is meant to be in depth. Now, I'm speaking from a musicological point of view because one of the things that I've been passionately pursuing as well as part of my work, and this is my professional work in UPM, is to understand what are the roles and functions of music in society. Because if you think about it, since ancient times, since the beginning of man, so to speak, there are so many evidences for the presence and the use of music in our lives. And this is whether we're talking about people who come from tribes and indigenous groups, or whether you're talking about modern society. It is one of the things that has stayed constant through the ages. Every culture, every society, regardless of how sophisticated, how primitive they are, all have some form of music practice. So there is actually an ethnomusicologist and a cultural anthropologist by the name of Alan P. Merriam, who in 1964 went and looked through the annals of research. And what he distilled were 10 essential functions of music in society. Reasons why we continue to use music as part of our existence, as a way to also reflect our identities. And entertainment is one of those functions.
And if I'm hearing correctly, right, is out of the many, it does sound like the world tends to just lean on its one function, which is entertainment. And through that, would you then just briefly, yes or no, say that actually music in all its potential has been suppressed in that sense?
That's a really good observation. I would say that this tendency to overemphasize on entertainment's role is really because we are surrounded with so much media and advertising. And if you look into research, because I can't help it, I'm a researcher, so I always have to go back to the evidence and try to understand what's happening in the world around us. And there's a lot of research to show that music is used frequently as a vehicle to promote advertising, branding, and that's why you have music in jingles. When you hear advertisements, there's always some kind of musical soundtrack. When you watch TV, when you go and watch the movies, music always acts as that extra layer that creates atmosphere background. But what they do is they take it to a level where they're using it as an intentional tool of psychological influence, so that it encourages to buy more of that product or to be more persuaded in that particular scene that we're watching.
Oh, wow.
And so one of the things that I teach in UPM is also music psychology and sociology.
Yeah.
And so where therapy comes in is we are looking at music in all of its creative potential, but we're harnessing the uses of music based on those 10 functions to contribute towards stimulating, supporting, and enhancing human functioning, whether it's on an individual or social level.
So hearing that, right, I find it very fascinating, right, on its functions. So maybe on your opinion, right, how music is used now, at least in the entertainment industry, aside from just putting out their agendas and message, what do you think are the further implications or the consequences of the limitations of how music is used today then?
So it's a very one-sided view of what music has to offer. And I happen to have also a slightly different background coming from my faith, where for years and years I actually was involved in my church ministry. And I have to say, part of what drew my interest into therapy was also because of that faith perspective. One thing that happened along the journey of lecturing and working in UPM, and I've been teaching this music psychology course in UPM for more than 20 years now. So it's something which I was asked to be involved in because I have that as part of my training from the UK. But as I got deeper and deeper into it, and then the Lord opened up opportunities for me to serve in church. It was really fascinating because at one point, I remember when I first met my husband, it's all part of his bigger plan, right?
Yeah.
So when I met my husband, and his church, uniquely, Jalan Imri Chapel, has a tradition of church choir, which is quite unusual because not many churches have choirs. But their choir goes all the way back to the time of Miss Eleanor Cook, who was the headmistress of Bukit Bintang Girls' School.
Yeah.
So I was very fortunate because at the time when I was called into ministry and to serve, and I was praying and I was asking the Lord, I said, I know I have this music background, but at the end of the day, when I enter the church, I want to know, what is my place? Where do you see me serving you? And so he brought me into the choir, and Miss Eleanor Cook was there. And at that time, we had a really, really wonderful conductor, and his name was Uncle Dickie. We call him Dickie. He's Dickie Wee. And it just so happened that when I first joined this church ministry, so I came in as a choir member, and I said, all that music training, none of that matters. I'm here to be his servant, and so I'm going to be a choir member. And up to the point where if he feels the need to do something more or different, then I will just trust and obey him. But for now, I'll just be a choir member. So I was in the church as part of the choir team for about a year. And I didn't say much about my background and what I did. But I think, that was something which was the preparation ground of how the Lord started to help me to begin to understand, appreciate what church ministry is about, what worship in his eyes is about. And that was an excellent contrast for me because it just so happened one of the things I did when I came back from the UK of my studies was I was, hanging out with my family, and then I had younger cousins, and they were all into MTV. That was the time when MTV was a big thing. And so I wanted to get to know them. I wanted to bond with them again. I've been overseas so many years. And I started to watch these MTV videos with them, and I was disturbed. Because a lot of what I saw on TV marketed to these kids was stuff that was so sexualized. A lot of things that were embedded into music videos. Now, many music videos are also part fantasy, right? So they may provide a visual background and context to the songs that are being sung. But when you see that whole package and you realize there's a lot of content that we would consider to be inappropriate for kids. And for these music videos, they do not actually have any kind of parental guidance rating. Unlike movies, unlike, even albums, in the States, they're very strict about that. But music videos, it's almost as if everything just slips in through the cracks. So having my university background and my music psychology background, I was really disturbed. So I decided to go and do research into it and try to understand why are they creating such content and how do they get away with it. And it was really eye-opening. But that was when I realized so much of it is being run and driven by an entertainment industry that basically has business people at the helm. So music is a commodity. Music is a means for them to be able to boost commercial sales. They're not necessarily musicians themselves. So whether they see music in the same way that musicians see music, whether they care about music in the same way, it is basically a product, it's a commodity that they can use to generate and boost sales. On one hand, I have to admit I admired the brilliance in the way that they actually went and engineered. And you look at the history of MTV, they actually go to the extent where I think they were one of the pioneers, as far as I could see from the research, that actually went into focus groups. They tried to actually explore the lifestyles of teenagers. There's something they call merchants of cool. So long before the age of TikTok and Instagram and social media that we know today, they were already doing these things back in the 80s. In the 90s, I came back in the 90s. And during that time, what they did was they tried to engage youth at a level where they were developing deep customer insights. And they wanted to know, what are youth passionate about? What makes them think? So they did all that very meticulous research. But they took that content and they translated it into programming.
Wow.
And I've actually come across research done in the UK by music psychologists that talk about how there was a certain period when they were doing all these charting of their profits, and they noticed that the demographic that was not as into popular music and the videos at that time were young boys, teenagers. So they actually started to introduce more and more of this sexualized content because they knew that during those impressionable teenage years, that is the time when, you know, teens are going to be curious about sexuality. And so they had some kind of comparison between gender difference because they wanted to see what are the ways that they can sell and promote more of their product, appealing to the interests and the needs and the growing pains of these teenagers. So that's when the sexualized content became increasing.
Wow.
So this is actually in research, so I got a shock because I actually saw it, black and white as a research finding.
It's so the sexualized aspect, right? Is a tool,
yes,
or a way to take advantage of the young boys' vulnerabilities or the moment of their growth.
Unfortunately, so it is unfortunately a very, very sinister kind of way of. I think to some extent now that we are oversaturated with all these media messages, advertisement, it's bombarding us from every sphere. There is some level of awareness that we know that when they do these things, they're just trying to get us to buy more.
Sure.
Right? But to what extent are they willing to go and how far have they gone? I've actually seen Senate reports where in the US, because a lot of these things, it started in the US and then it was marketed to the rest of the world.
Copy paste.
But it was also where in the US, the effects down the road were seen. And it came to a head to a point where one of the vice presidents, Al Gore, his wife, Tippi Gore, actually tried to lobby at Senate level to try to rein in some of this content because it was going out of control. And the way they were marketing to children was actually inappropriate. But it's a free market. And, they always talk about how, it's up to parents to regulate.
Correct, and supply and demand, So, when you say this, right, I am reminded of some of the musicians who have come out to share about within the industry, like Lady Gaga, right? She said initially to start off where she got where she needed to be was that she had to, the producers or whoever that she was auditioning for to come forward, she had to reveal a lot of herself, which was very shameful. And I think she recounts that in tears, and you can find this on YouTube.
Right.
And now I feel like it's gotten worse because what I'm hearing from you is these people have gathered all the data, right? And now in the 21st century, they have been able to even make it more concise, more straightforward, more sexualized within the contents of a reel and TikTok, right? They wanted to find what makes them tick. Now they created an app called talk, right? And I'm no pun intended, but yeah. And I mean, the most recent one that I find it slightly shocking was Sam Smith.
Oh God.
Yeah, the Grammys, where he literally just sang and did Satan worship. That's the level of content that's being churned out, right? So yeah.
And it is celebrated. It's seen as cool.
Correct.
You know, and when you even look into the song, because I was horrified when I first heard this. When Sam Smith first came out, I actually liked his songs. But over time, whether it's because of the pressure of the industry, pressure to stay relevant, and he needed to up his game. Unfortunately, the way he has upped his game in the direction he has gone has brought in more and more of this controversial content, which unfortunately is partly what sells. And it's almost as if this shock tactic is also part and parcel of their image and what he ultimately put out there for Unholy, whether it was the performance, which was very, very clearly alluding to satanic worship and celebrating Satan himself, but also the song itself. It's all about cheating and adultery. And how can we expose our kids to these things and accompany it with cool messages? Because they're going to get all these mixed signals. And it's getting harder and harder to try to teach kids from young to have that discernment, to be able to differentiate between what is considered as appropriate, inappropriate. A lot of kids these days, they are hooked onto the gadgets. I have an ongoing challenge with my own daughter. We regulate her use of iPad, whatever, media use, internet, as much as we can. But we are also equally concerned about the fact that she has to go to Sunday school and she has to be exposed to these alternative values, but values that we believe are going to ground her and set her up for life. And I know many other Christian parents who feel the same, but it's almost as if what is out there in the world is just coming from all directions. And in many ways, it's a coordinated strategy, because you have all these, if you look at, I remember when I was studying this MTV phenomenon, and you look back at, where are these companies and how they ultimately are all linked back to their media conglomerate. And this media companies control many, many other companies. And so there is a coordination going on. And they are actually strategically passing on that content, reinforcing the content across different channels. That's why it's not an accident.
There's a bigger picture going on here.
There is, and it's all under these huge titans of companies.
Are you at liberty to share some of these titans?
Sure, Viacom was one of them. Viacom was at the top of the chain for MTV. And apart from the music video content they produce, they were also, into fashion, into so many other. That's why it's not a coincidence actually. When you see how out there you have, I think the K-pop sensation now is a good example. It's very current. So not only do you have them singing, but it's actually, if you look into the history of K-pop, it's a manufactured genre, right? And they use a lot of data, but they are also interconnected with fashion, in food. There's a whole K culture right now that has taken the world by storm.
In fact, their bill that the government proposed was to pump in most of their government funds into entertainment, and they spread it out. So like BTS, what's the other Netflix show, the Squid Game. It's everything's connected, right? That's what you're saying.
It is. And I think all the more in this day and age, Christian discernment is so important, but it's also so difficult to teach our younger generation, because they are growing up with all these alternative ways to engage and to express themselves as being equally acceptable. Well, still, it is cool. It is, something to be celebrated. I don't allow my daughter to go on TikTok. And there are reasons, because, there have been a lot of mental health. There have been research reports coming out.
What was she gonna say next? Well, that will be in part 2. But also do catch up with us on episode 2 when we talk with MJ on cryptocurrency, Web 3.0, and how a Christian should understand these things. It'll be one of these boxes here. So I'll catch you. Click. Don't forget to subscribe and comment. Check you on the next one.